Hey guys, Dan here, welcome to this review. Today we're going to have a look at the Cammus wheelbase with the corresponding GT1 wheel. So Cammus is a Chinese company that is actually pretty new to sim racing. I think this base released actually 2021. They also do like electric supercars and electric go-karts and stuff like that. But then they also released some products for sim racing. So the base is a direct drive. That means the torque is directly applied to the shaft. There are no belts or something. It feels very nice. We have up to 50 Newton meters of torque. And the Cammus base also has like some buttons on the base. I have to say first, when I saw that, I was like, okay, why? But it's actually pretty useful for like functions that you don't use all the time, like for example, the start or ignition buttons, or maybe like lights, wiper. Then it's also independent of the steering wheel, and you will always have that on the base. Unique, but actually useful. Obviously, because of that, you cannot front mount the base. Either there are some slots here on the side that fit regular T-nuts, so you can side mount it, or there's also this bracket that attaches from the bottom. Obviously, you can also attach it to your wheel deck from the bottom if you don't want to use the brackets. They sent me two same versions of the side, so I had to get a little bit creative here. So it looks a bit strange, but I guess normally it should come with the correct brackets and you shouldn't have a problem here. So let's turn on the base. We'll do its calibration, one rotation, yep, and we're good to go. What we have here is 5 normal buttons and then 2 encoders, and then a 2-position momentary switch and a 2-position latching switch. I don't really know what the latching should be good for, but I would have preferred to have 2 of the momentary ones, but yeah, it is what it is. If you know anything that this can be actually used for in sim racing, let me know in the comments down below. The buttons feel decent, but they are made out of plastic and you don't really feel when you press them. I mean, they light up, which is pretty nice, but I wish you would have a little better feedback when pushing them. Rotaries have a little bit of resistance, not too much, but I think they are nice to use. They don't skip a lot of steps like some rotary implementations of others. They also have a push button, which is nice, and then, like I said, the 2 toggle switches here. On the backside of the base, you can connect pedals, handbrake, shifters and stuff. I don't have anything connected to that. You can also have like a emergency stop button. I don't really think it's needed for a base with 15 Newton meters of torque. Next up here, we have the quick release. Works very well, I have to say. It's a proper quick release. There's a little button on the side that you need to push in order to like really remove the wheel. But it works fine. Here's the button. You can see it on the camera. So you push that down. Otherwise, you can like push the ring towards you, but it will not get off the base. So you need to push that down and then remove it. And then putting it back on is pretty much straightforward. It needs to be in the correct position, but even if you like put it on slightly rotated, it will just snap in place. The quick release, it's not the best quick release in the world, I have to say, but it works. I would say in terms of play, it's kind of similar to the Fanatec UR1 system, maybe a little bit more, but you don't notice this while driving, so I think it's perfectly usable. If you think about it, the wheel is $200 and comes with a quick release, and for some other quick releases you pay like $200 for the quick release alone, so I think it's fine. If you see the play here, I mean, it's a little bit exaggerated since I also installed the extension here. I put it on here because that puts the wheel a bit closer towards me and I didn't have to like change everything in the rig. If you don't use an extension, the play will be less than what you see in the video here, but yeah, you can see there's a little bit of movement. Not ideal, but considering what you pay for this, I think it's acceptable. You don't feel anything of that while driving. Next up is the wheel. We have 2 shifters on the back, aluminum casing, carbon fiber pedals, a little bit sharp on the edges. Chamfers here would be nice. And in general, I have to say the shifters don't feel very good. The magnets, in my opinion, are too weak. It's too easy to pull here. And if you have a look at it, they already have like a second set of magnets installed to the shifter. See, this is the standard. And then they have a second one on top. But still, for my taste, too weak. And they also don't use a switch in here. They use a magnetic position sensing. I don't know if it's a Hall switch or like a Hall sensor that measures everything of the position. But something I noticed, it's sometimes, not often, but sometimes I get double shifts. I generally think switches are better. You can have good implementations with Hall sensors as well. I think Cube Controls does that as well, but it always introduces some sort of unreliability from my experience. So I would rather see like a standard switch here, but yeah, maybe some fine-tuning on the software here to get rid of the occasional double shift would be nice, but it's not a deal breaker. I've had that happen maybe like 2 times in my tests, so yeah, It's okay. Then on the front, kind of similar inputs as the base. We have 4 buttons that light up when you push them. Again, they feel a little bit mushy. There's no haptic feedback, but still, like, considering that this wheel is $200, I think we cannot complain about that. If you use like 4 auto buttons, for example, that would be like $50 alone. So, but I just wish there was a little better haptic feedback. Then we also have a momentary switch and a latching switch. Again, I don't really know what to do with the latching ones for sim racing. I would have preferred to have another momentary and maybe left-right instead of up-down to go through the black boxes and stuff like that. And then 2 encoders with push button. The knob, I would love to see like a little higher quality knob on here. It just makes the wheel feel a little cheaper than it's necessary. I mean, it is a cheap wheel, but still. I think if you would at least, for example, have like not 4 colors on the buttons, just like make all the buttons black or like maybe 2 buttons black and 2 red or something, and then maybe an aluminum knob on this, and I think this could look way better. But yeah, it's just like visuals, you know. Then the steering wheel it comes with feels very nice. It's made out of leather, and then I think it's hand stitched. Feels very nice in my hands. Nice little yellow ring here on top. Yeah, nothing to complain about here. I've definitely had wheels that feel worse. This is actually really, really nice. I might use this with a different button box for my other bases, probably. But yeah, I think next thing we'll have a look at the software. Installation, pretty easy. You download it from their website and then install it. The only thing that is a little bit annoying, like some of the installation instructions are actually in Chinese and I had no idea what I was installing. But my PC still works, I can confirm that. But maybe translate that to English for everyone that does not understand Chinese. That would be good. So when you start the software, this is the first page of the software. You see what's connected. We have the GT1 wheelbase and the GT1 steering wheel. Then on the side, you have a little launcher of games that you have installed that you can just double click and then start the game from here. But let's actually get into the parameters here. These are the settings that I use if you want to copy them. I think the settings it comes with out of the box are a little bit weird. So as for steering wheel angle, I mean, most games adjust it automatically. So just make sure to match the wheel configuration with the game configuration. I use 900 degrees like everywhere with my SimCube with this, all the same. Then power, set it to 100%. If it's too strong for you, reduce it in game. Always set the base to 100% of power, because if you reduce it on the base and then the game wants to put out higher forces, you will just introduce artificial clipping. So it's better to always have the base running at 100% and then reducing the force feedback in the game. The only advantage you get when you reduce it in the base setting is, like, for example, if there's a crash and you don't want these super high peak forces, then reducing it on the base will help with that. But I think most games don't have crazy peak forces in crashes anymore. I think they're all like safety mechanisms for that. So yeah, power and effects ratio, set that to 100%. Effects ratio is the effects from the force feedback, so you always want to have these two at 100%. Then I run a little bit of damping, around 12%. Also a little bit of friction and inertia. Friction is like the weight on your wheel, so if I turn this up a lot, it will be harder to rotate the wheel, but you don't have to go super crazy with that. Some people prefer a wheel that has no weight. I don't like that. I always run a little bit of friction and a little bit of inertia. Inertia is also kind of similar to friction, but it's not like the constant weight of the wheel, but actually when you change the rotation speed of the wheel, if that makes any sense. So if you have like a counter steer situation where you quickly need to change the steering angle, this is where inertia will dampen the wheel a little bit and make it heavier. So I like to run a little bit of friction and inertia here, but just try it out. Like, so many people always ask for settings. What do you use? Don't look too much what others use. Actually play with the sliders and see what works best for you. It's not always the best to just copy settings from somewhere and then use those. Don't be afraid to play with the sliders, and don't be afraid to use like crazy values if that works for you, you know? It's all personal preference. Okay, idle spring is, well, an idle spring that makes the wheel return to center in idle, but like I always have that turned off. And we have the test and set tab. Well, I mean, you see when I rotate the wheel, it will show that. If I push the buttons, it will show that on the software here. Yeah, we don't have pedals and handbrake connected. And then the last tab in the software is for firmware update. As you can see, I'm running firmware 1.5.3.3. I think there's actually 1.5.4 these days. I've had several updates for the space. When there's a new version, you typically go to release firmware update, click that. Or you can do a manual firmware update and then update to the file you downloaded from the website, but we're not going to do that now. This is actually the second version of the base that they sent to me. The first one that I got had some issues with the power supply that they fixed. It's probably not an issue for most people, but when you run the base at 100% force feedback in-game and on the base, it would like turn off the force feedback after some time. With the updated version, I've been running 100% in-game and on the base for hours without any problems. But I think that's actually enough talking about features and specs and everything. Let's go on the track. So we're going to use ACC for that. These are my settings. I use the gain at 90%. I'm used to a SimiCube 2 Pro running at close to 100% force feedback, so I always need to bump up these values quite a bit with these weaker bases. It will definitely not be ideal because like that you will get more clipping of the force feedback, but yeah, that's just the strength that I'm used to. But let's go on the track. Alright, so here we are on ACC because I think it has one of the best force feedbacks out there. Let's start the car. Like I said, I put it here on the base. Ignition and starter. Would be good to remember which buttons you used. But let's get out on the track and see how it feels. So it definitely feels like a typical direct drive. So the force feedback is very, very direct. And you definitely can feel everything. So for example, I hit the curbs here. I directly noticed that in the force feedback. The 15 Newton meters, I'm not sure if it actually puts out 15. It feels... I mean, I'm used to 25, so maybe it is 15. Actually, it's definitely way more power than the Fanatec CSL DD or DD Pro, for example, at 8. If it's almost twice like that, I don't have anything to really measure that. But it's fine. I can't drive. Holy. The encoders work very well. If I change that here, it's off screen now, but it doesn't skip steps, which is nice. Seems to be very hard to get like a proper encoder implementation these days. But this works very well. What I said earlier about the shifters, it is a little bit too weak. I wish they would just use stronger magnets to get like a little bit more tactile feeling on the shifts. But the force feedback overall, it feels good. It's not as detailed as a SimiCube. I feel you lose a little bit of details in the force feedback. It might be because of the settings that I use, because I turned it up so much, so it's just clipping a bit too much. But it definitely has these direct drive characteristics where you directly feel what the car is doing, where it automatically wants to counter steer for you. Using a direct drive definitely is a little bit of pay to win in my opinion, because it's so much easier to drive the car on the limit and to control it. The play in the quick release, I don't notice that at all while driving. But, you know, we sim racers, we hate flags. So this is something this quick release has, keep that in mind. The wheel, by the way, works wirelessly. There's a little cable for power that goes through the quick release, but you will never see that. And then the actual data connection is via Bluetooth to the base. So you cannot use the steering wheel with other bases. But you also don't have to mess around with Bluetooth settings or something, it automatically connects. But yeah, that's it for ACC. Let's quickly hop into iRacing, I would say. Alright, here we are, iRacing GT4 around Interlagos. Oh, I need to turn up the force feedback. So the wheel force in this case would be 15 Newton meters, and then the maximum force, if you want to have like basically close to 100% force feedback, set this to the same. That means if the steering rack of the car wants to produce 15 Newton meters of torque, it will map that on the full 15 Newton meters of the wheel. If you want to have less, for example, if you set it to 25, that means the steering rack of the game will have to produce a force of 25 Newton meters in order to map that on the full 15 Newton meters. But we'll just do 100% here. And I think with older games like iRacing, with not the best force feedback engine in the world, I think this is only 60 Hz. This is where something, I think this base needs to improve. Because, like for example on the SimiCube, you get these interpolation filters. And I don't know if this has something and it's just like internal, but you can't tweak it. So it feels on iRacing not as good as on ACC. It's less details. It feels sometimes a little bit more like notchy, grainy, kind of hard to describe. But it's still like complaining on a high level. It still feels very good. It still feels better than anything that is not a direct drive. But I wish they would push an update for the software where you could like configure that to get like a little better feeling on older games like iRacing. You can get rid of the problem by just using IRFFB because that has like a telemetry mode with an update rate of 360 Hz for the force feedback. Feels very nice with this base. But out of the box, yeah, I mean like it still feels good, but I think there's room for improvement on iRacing. But apart from that, oh god, I have no idea where to brake on this combo. But apart from that, it feels good. You can feel all the details here. Curbs are there, like you feel when the car gets loose in the rear, it will automatically try to correct it. Let's try this test here. It doesn't get too crazy on the straight if you do that. If you do that with a DD2 or something, it will just like go into mayhem mode. It's not as stable as the SimmerCube, for example, but then again, this base is... It's a $500 base. And I think the value is definitely great. But yeah, apart from the force feedback disabled problem on the first revision that I had here, I've had no real complaints with this base and steering wheel. Well, I mean like the occasional double shift. But apart from that, I think the value is very good. It's just like I need to put in stronger magnets here because the shifters really what I absolutely do not like about the wheel. It's so freaking light. Actually, the force feedback feels stronger on iRacing. I don't know why, because I had it on 90%. I mean 90% versus 100%, so probably makes sense regarding that. But yeah, that's it for this review. I think overall $700 for this is an amazing value. But there's one thing, if you can get it for $700 or like $500 for the base, it works with any wheel, by the way. You can connect your own quick release. You can just use, like, for example, a GSI wheel with a USB cable. It does not require a Cammus wheel to be connected to get force feedback like other manufacturers. But the problem is, for $500, I can absolutely recommend it. But the shipping actually is insanely expensive. I think it's like $200 to Germany. And if you add that up, you're getting very close to the price of a VRS base. At $700, I think it's still a decent value, but I would probably save up a little more and get the VRS base, which has more power and a little more refined software with better filters and everything. But at $500, it's definitely good. I think Cammus needs to work a little bit on the distributor network. Nobody wants to pay 200 euros on shipping. And if you can actually get it for around $500 or euros, then I think it basically has no competition. I have not tested the Moza R9, but I think 50 Newton meters is probably the minimum that I would get. I have the DD Pro, or I had the DD Pro, and I think at 8 Newton meters, it might be fine for you, but it's very, very, very weak. And 50 Newton meters, it still feels a little bit weak, but it's probably enough for most people. It's not as detailed as a SimmerCube, for example, but then again, a SimmerCube is like more than twice the price. The steering wheel for $200 is fine. The shifters are a little bad. I think they can improve on that. Buttons and everything is okay. Maybe replace the latching buttons with a momentary that goes left-right instead of up-down. Then it probably makes a little bit more sense for sim racing. But that's pretty much it for this review. Please let me know in the comments down below if you prefer these kind of shorter reviews or if I should go more into detail. I'm just interested what you kind of would prefer for a review. But yeah, that's it. If you liked the video, as always, maybe give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye-bye. By the way, if you want to like save even more money, you don't even need a steering wheel. You can just like use these buttons to drive. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, in theory you can, but yeah.